one of the documents that I put in this brief, this is the initial briefing we put together for President Obama shortly after he got into office. And I keep it here at this building for reasons of briefing. It's not the only copy, don't worry. But in it, you know, one of the documents that I was very key to emphasize was the 1951 document from Canada, from Wilbur Smith, a top secret document that got accidentally declassified that states that this is the most sensitive issue in the history of the United States. It is the most secret. That there's a team headed up by Dr. Vannevar Bush, who was the guy who was the czar over the whole Manhattan Project, that Edward Teller and Oppenheimer, but if you look him up in history, Vannevar Bush was one of the key people who was, and that team headed up the study of these so-called flying saucers, as they were called back, how quaintly, in 1950 when that document came out. And the secrecy around that was so great that in this memo it states not only do these flying saucers exist, and there's a group studying the modus operandi, I'm quoting, the method of action and technology behind them, but that it was more secret than the development of the hydrogen bomb. Now remember, the H-bomb, everybody know the difference between an atomic bomb and a nuclear bomb? Most people don't. An atomic bomb is fissile material. Okay, so what we unfortunately dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki was a very, in a sense, low-yield fission reaction where you split the atom. A thermonuclear bomb has that within it, and then it goes to a fusion, like the sun reaction, and it's 100,000 times more powerful. And so the H-bomb, the hydrogen bomb, which are what is the standard use today in the world, at least by America and others, is a thermonuclear fusion bomb, uncontrolled, which is much more powerful than an atomic bomb. Most people have no idea the difference between atomic and, I mean, these get conflated, but I want to be clear. I mean, there was no reason for us not to be educated in 2014. And so we'll have questions later at the last hour, because it's not mic'd. So what you have to understand is that that was the ultimate doomsday weapon, the hydrogen bomb. And this memo, which has never been contested, states that the projects dealing with the modus operandi, the technologies of these UFOs, was a bigger secret in the United States than the hydrogen bomb. So if you just think about the implications of that for a moment, then you begin to realize what kind of things would be done to keep this genie in the bottle, and has been done. Now, did it start in the 40s, 50s? No. T. Townsend Brown, many of you know of the RAND Corporation. He became someone who was a key figure in the development of the RAND Corporation. T. Townsend Brown, and all this information is at SeriousDisclosure.com. If you click on the energy button and go to all the links, there are documents, there's all this. That he was the man who figured out that if you put a certain type of high voltage resonant field using crystalline structures, that you would get lift. And actually, the crystals would begin to look like they were expanding, and did expand, take up more space. Amazing. And they would cause a lifting effect. That was in the late 20s, 1920s. The Kautsky-Frost experiment that was then done in 1928 or 29 in Germany reproduced that, but did even more work on it. So it isn't as if this all started after Roswell or something. There were classified projects looking into this effect of very high voltage systems, lift effect, mass cancellation. So if something becomes massless, anybody know your physics equations? Velocity is equal to, but it's inversely proportional to the mass. So go run your equation, and when mass disappears, theoretically, velocity can go to infinity. But what actually happens when it becomes massless and a massless particle, boom, it's actually in another dimension. So this is why you can get these objects. If you look at our radar tapes, if you look at the Disclosure Project witnesses at seriousdisclosure.com, thanks to the work of some folks who worked with me for the last 15 or 20 years, we have several dozen of these people up there. And one of them, John Callahan, was doing the case with the airline, Japan Airlines in Alaska in the early 80s. And you know, he was flying along on the polar route, 747, and this massive UFO, extraterrestrial vehicle, actually is what they're called, ETVs, it's what they're called in NSA, National Security Agency, appeared, and it was the size of a destroyer or larger on the ocean, but it was up in the air. And with one radar sweep, it would then be 180 degrees the other way, moving completely non-linearly, or in ways that were inexplicable to anyone flying a jet, all right, or a rocket. So that radar tape, we have the original for, because this chief of the investigation unit for the FAA took it with him when he retired and gave it to the Disclosure Project. So it's in my vault. You get the sense of this then, that anyone who's gotten close to the subject knows that we're not dealing with your granddad's Oldsmobile or jet or rocket. And that is the crux of the problem, is that it is such a big leap in technology from where we are now that a lot of people say, it's great, but it's too disruptive. And as the man at the university club told me, no one who gets into a powerful position in government wants to have to deal with that much change. It's just too much change to deal with. Now, unfortunately, it would have been a manageable change between 1910 and 1930, but we missed that window. And I wasn't alive then anyway, so I couldn't have helped you out. Neither was anyone else in this room, I suspect, unless you've aged very well. You're not 100 years old. So the question becomes, why hasn't someone, if these technologies are real, done something with it? Well, they have. And it turns out, if you look at the history of this, T. Townsend Brown started out in the open world and then got pulled in by the military with his anti-gravity work that then got pulled into the RAND Corporation. We have people like Stan Meyer. And you've heard this, people think, is it an urban myth or not, that Mr. Meyer had a car running on water that had one of these electrolyzers that would take water dissociated into hydrogen and oxygen and run it in real time without a fuel cell, without storing it. Yes, he did. Unfortunately, he falsified all his patents, which vitiated their legal viability because he didn't want anyone to know his little secret. And then he died mysteriously after he was meeting with some people from NATO. Ran out of a Cracker Barrel in somewhere, I think in Tennessee, and collapsed in the parking lot saying, I've been poisoned, I've been poisoned, I've been poisoned. Now my team has met with his twin brother who actually did the circuits for him in the 80s and 90s. And this is a very doable, reproducible experiment if we had a laboratory, which is what we've been calling for the funding to do. But what Stan Meyer did, and this is something I'm going to go into, what have been the mistakes? How can we learn from the mistakes I've made in the last 15 years, but the mistakes others have made in the last 24. So if I were to drop dead tonight, one of the reasons I'm making this film is I'd like for people to know, have the benefit of what I've gone through and what I've learned, because it is not obvious. It is very counterintuitive. Like most inventors, and I've never had this mindset, Stan Meyer felt that, well, he can monetize this by keeping it, the little secret formula, putting a patent into the patent office, but not putting all the detail in so no one else could really reproduce it. But of course, if you can't reproduce the technology from the patent is useless, as you know, and you can talk to any patent attorney. That's the whole point of a patent, is to protect it. Otherwise, you keep it a trade secret, like the secret ingredients of Coca-Cola. And what happened is that he died before he could really find a way to move it out, because about the time his little invention became known, where even wastewater could be used to run your house or car through a generator just burning hydrogen and oxygen gas, which has zero pollution because the you have water vapor as the tailpipe, which you can actually put back into the system and keep using it, the water. You're just pulling out the energy equivalent of the bonds, the atomic bonds, and the way that you're breaking them at very low power is what I'm going to keep referring to as this magic sweet spot. High voltage and very specific resonant frequencies depending on the substrate. By substrate I mean water, crystalline material, air, magnetic coils. So you think of those as substrates, but the principle is what you need to understand. It's very high voltage, specific resonance, and we're not talking 110 or 220, thousands of or millions of volts at very, very specific cycles per second, resonances, depending on the material. That opens what's called a Poynting vector into the zero-point energy field and bound. Then you're going to hit that sweet spot. You're going to go, quote, over unity, meaning you're getting more power out than in. But unfortunately, Stan Meyer, while he had an authentic system, and he had really, people say, how did he come across this? An accidental empirical observation, which is really the sort of the springboard of many sciences, an accidental observation by someone who's astute. And he worked at a radar plant, and he observed that under certain frequencies and voltages, water just went. It was quite an accidental observation. He went, wow, because H2O, 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen, you can burn it. And when you burn it, there's no pollution. All you have is water vapor from the result of burning it. So he went, wow. So he started experimenting, and his twin brother Steve helped him eventually develop the circuits. Now, because he wanted to keep this secret, and he did not disperse in an open source way that technical information, everyone who's tried to reproduce it hasn't been able to, because they haven't, A, understood the concepts very well, and then even if they have been approached eventually and threatened. And we're going to talk about the suppression and the threats that go with this kind of technology, which is real. And when he was developing this, he eventually discovered that he could use a material that was in a magnetically charged sort of liquid in a toroid. A toroid is a donut, like it looks like a, okay. And this was an electromagnetic generator. It didn't burn any so-called Brown's gas or water turning it into hydrogen and oxygen. And this object was the big secret of his portfolio that we were trying to acquire a few years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, those of you who followed our work. The heirs of the Stan Meyer collection wanted to sell it. And we had a few $100,000, but we didn't have millions. So we lost. And it went to a corporation that's in Michigan, which is all we need to talk about, that has been working on it since. And they are making the identical mistake that Stan Meyer made. They're doing it secretively. I was recently called in a panic by one of their funders out of the United Kingdom, who stated to me that they had gotten these systems to operate, including the toroid, which means that you have a solid state, basically a solid state system with some magnetically charged material in it, and it'll run your house. Now that device had a national security order slapped on it. And most people, Stan Meyer never spoke of it because he was told, if you speak of this, you're violating the National Security Act, and we'll seize it, and you'll be in prison. So we knew this from someone who had worked very, very, very closely, because this man who had worked closely with Stan Meyer said, forget the car running on water. That's nothing. Look for the toroid. So when we went there to the storage facility where all this stuff was kept, it was there. And all the binders and all the inventors' books and all the manual, everything was there. We went, oh, wow. We made appeals to the public. You know, I'm a doctor and I'm doing okay, but I'm not rich enough to just lay out several $1 million. I can't write a check like that. So we did what we could, but we lost. Now, when Stan Meyer had this, of course, he wasn't prepared to go mano a mano with the national security state. because he was afraid. I mean, they made it very clear. You're going to prison, and that's that, or worse. At a certain point, after he passed away, that all this stuff, as I said, went into storage. So from 1996 to 2009, whenever it was, a few years ago, it was just sort of nobody knew what happened to it. Then it surfaced. And we were really trying to do it. The tragedy of today is that in the last month or so, I got this phone call. And I had predicted at the time that that collection disappeared. I said, if it's going to be handled the way these people are stating they're going to handle it, which is to do it secretively, trying to corporatize, monetize, and privatize this technology, first of all, it's going to take them several years to get it operational because these were traditional engineers who didn't understand the physics. So you've got to get the right physicists and engineers on your team. And folks like myself who've seen these things in labs. We'll talk about this. I've been to classified labs where I've seen them operating. The second thing is that you have got to do it, cameras rolling, streamed on Ustream. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? Would Silicon Valley ever buy into this, or Microsoft or Google or Apple? No, because everything's about patents and secrecy and getting over on your competitor. But if you play that secrecy game, guess who's going to be watching everything you're doing in real time, keystroke by keystroke on every computer in your lab? The National Security Agency and the National Security State. The instant you hit the eureka moment, they're coming in with an NSO, a National Security Order, and you're shut down. That's what happens. And unfortunately, that is what has now happened to this group out of Michigan, where they are being threatened and they are trying to relocate their entire lab to a friendly country. So I talked to this man out of the United Kingdom, I won't say what his name is, who's been helping fund it, I mean millions of dollars. And I said, look, there are no friendly countries. You put this in the Amazon jungle, there's a E-Systems Raytheon facility there with security people who will come in. Where are you going to go on this planet that's beyond the reach of the, what I call transnational superstate of security? Because it is transnational. So there's this naivete, and I'm speaking now to all you inventors out there and all you people who live in the world of inventions and patents and secrecy. There's no place you can hide, and there's no place you can run. Believe me. Please believe me when I tell you this. And therefore, you must do it openly with the whole world watching. Good phrase from the 60s, the whole world's watching. Now, 10 years ago, you couldn't have done that. There wasn't Ustream and Yahoo and whatever, YouTube and all this stuff. Now there is. So, not the bathrooms of the lab, but all the workstations of the lab, real-time streamed on the internet. And invite people to see it. Someone comes in with a national security order, you caught them red-handed. And then I'm on every network I can get on, and I've been on almost every network in the world saying, the technologies that would save the environment, get us off oil, are being ruthlessly suppressed by a rogue group of people who are not being supervised by the President and the Congress, and without the consent of the people. This is an illegal act, and we need people to help us. Democracy.